Continuamos con nuestras reflexiones sobre el corazón de San
We
José.
continue with our reflections on the heart of Saint Joseph. Today, I would like to speak of the phrase, I consecrate myself for them. The first Totus Tuus of history is Saint Joseph's. As we concluded our previous meditation, I shared with you a very profound experience that was very moving that the Lord allowed me to have as I was hearing Saint Joseph pray in his deathbed, his last prayer for the ones that the Father had entrusted to him, the mother and the child. It was a prayer almost like the one that Jesus would pray for his before entering his passion and death. It's in this passage of Gospel in John chapter 17 we hear that Jesus says, Father, I have consecrated myself for them. These are the same words that I heard in this tender interior experience from the mouth of Saint Joseph as he was agonizing. Saint Joseph is the first heart in human history that consecrates his entire life to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and through her, with her, and by her, consecrated his entire life to Jesus. Saint Joseph is the model par excellence of living totally consecrated to Jesus through Mary. Since the moment of his betrothal to Our Lady, he consecrates his entire life to her. By means of her and through her, he consecrates it to Jesus, God made man who is hidden within the virginal and maternal womb of Our Lady, his spouse. Saint Joseph enfleshed with the fullness of his being what total consecration to Jesus through Mary and to Mary through Jesus is. As he took them into his home, he lived the first calling of the total consecration to them. As St. Louis de Montfort says so many centuries after, in this total giving to the plan of God, consecrating his life and generously donating it with a Josephite availability for the Blessed Virgin Mary, is that Saint Joseph begins to live for her, with her, by her, his total donation and of paternal availability for the Son of God. Being totally hers, Saint Joseph was totally of Jesus, totally at his service, participating in the mysteries of the Incarnation, protecting these mysteries, contemplating them, and being the guardian of the mother and the child so that the plan of salvation could be fulfilled. Yes, brothers and sisters, how beautiful it is to discover this, to discover that the first Totus Tuus of history was proclaimed by Saint Joseph with all of his actions in consecrating his life to love and serve the hearts of Jesus and Mary. As he took them into his home, into the intimacy of his heart, and beneath his attentive and responsible care, Saint Joseph opened for the entire Church the spiritual path of total consecration to Our Lady. Those of us who have read and deepened into the true devotions to the Blessed Virgin Mary of St. Louis de Montfort, where St. Louis de Montfort explains to us with a profoundly mystical gaze the importance of Marian consecration for every disciple of Christ. What are its potent effects, its apostolic efficacy? Besides, those of us who have made this total consecration as a sure, perfect, and fast means of attaining union with Christ, can today understand perhaps something that we had never thought. That Saint Joseph lived in his entire life, even the last moments, what this consecration proposes and teaches. I would even dare to say that his total consecration, dedication, and unconditional self-gift at the service of the mother and the child, and his entire mission in relation to them, was proclaiming the four simple phrases that St. Louis de Montfort utilizes to summarize the entire theology of Marian consecration. Mary, I am totally yours, and everything that I have is yours. I receive you as my everything. Give me your heart. What beautiful four phrases. Who could have said for the first time, I am totally yours, Mary? if it was not the one who was her virginal spouse and lived completely dedicated to love her, care for her, protect her, and allow himself to be totally radiated by the grace of her immaculate self. Who could have said for the first time in history, "And everything that I have is yours, Mary," if not the one who dedicated his work, his efforts, his battles, his gifts, to be able to exercise his mission as provider of the Blessed Mother and the Child, the Holy Family, the one who didn't keep anything for himself, but rather gave everything, his entire being, his works, his sacrifices and efforts, so that the Mother and the Child, the Son of God, born from her maternal womb, could have a home, could have nourishment, could have, above all, his love, his presence, his company, his care. They could have him fully. Him as a virginal spouse and as a virginal father. Saint Joseph was the greatest gift that Mary and Jesus had received. Who could have said for the first time in history, "I receive you as my everything," if not the one who, listening to the voice of the angel in a dream, went in haste to look for Our Lady, who was with a child in her womb? Why? To bring her into his home, to receive her into his home, to receive her in his interior, not only within his home, but the entirety of his life. Receiving her, he received the child who was within her. He received the great treasures that the Father was entrusting to his care. He was receiving with great humility and responsibility the mystery of the Incarnation, of which he was to be a protector and custodian. And since that moment, he was also to participate in, placing himself totally at their service as spouse and as a father, donating himself generously to Jesus and to Mary. To Jesus through Mary, and to Mary through Jesus. Only to him, the just, pure, chaste, and generous man, could the Father entrust the heart of Our Lady. Only his love, which reached the greatest heights that any man had ever reached, could be entrusted with the love of Our Lady, the spousal love of the Immaculate. Yes, Saint Joseph was entrusted first by having said in history, "Mary, give me your heart." Our Lady could freely trust in giving it to him, because in the heart of Saint Joseph, her heart was protected. Her virginal love as a spouse was cared for with the virtues of a man who loved her with tenderness, serenity, and loved her with a virginal love. A man who understood his beautiful responsibility of caring for the mystery of her maternity, which had been granted by a miracle of the Holy Spirit. In Redemptoris Custos number 20, St. John Paul II tells us that if God has given St. Joseph as spouse to Mary, it's not only just to accompany her in life, as a witness of virginity and as a tutor of honesty, but also so that he could participate by means of his conjugal bond in her exalted greatness. This means, brothers and sisters, that he was the first recipient and the most immediate recipient of receiving all the graces that resided in the Immaculate Heart, and to also be elevated to a maximized holiness because he was united to her, having consecrated himself totally to her as a virginal spouse and as custodian of her virginity. Yes, brothers and sisters, Saint Joseph is the first man, the first person who lives in an anticipated manner and in a perfect way the total consecration to Mary and through her to Jesus. Saint Joseph was the first one who intertwined with his works and with generous donation the four phrases that centuries later St. Louis de Montfort would teach us. Mary, I'm totally yours, and everything that I have is yours. I take you as my all. O Mary, give me your heart. The Totus Tuus of St. Joseph is an echo that trespasses all of the history of the Church, and at the same time, it teaches the Church the only path, the only sure path to Christ, and the sure path to the heart of Christ, because it is the same path that he journeyed to Jesus through Mary. By Mary, with Mary, for Mary, and through Mary, taking her as his spouse, and taking her into his home, receiving the mystery of her immaculate being, Saint Joseph came to be the virginal father of Jesus, the man whose heart lived as none other next to Christ, the heart in which the Son of God, the child Jesus, was able to rest, upon which Jesus found security, rest, and protection. Today, much is spoken of the importance of the cloak of St. Joseph, and there's so many relics, many times forgotten of the cloak of St. Joseph. However, that cloak was for Our Lady and for Jesus, the sacred tent of refuge that they could find, the powerful protection of the one who lived to love them and to protect them. Yes, he is the closest man to Jesus in all of history, his beloved and virginal father, his faithful custodian, his humble and wise teacher. Saint Joseph, therefore, is the perfect model of the total consecration to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and in her, with her, and through her, of the total consecration to Jesus. With this consecration, Saint Joseph becomes in the third heart of the indissoluble covenant of love that exists between the hearts of Jesus and Mary. And because of that, we can speak of the three hearts. Some years later, after the death of Saint Joseph, at the foot of the cross, Jesus would do that same entrustment of the heart to the maternal heart of Mary, the other man who was to completely entrust himself to the maternal care and guidance of Our Lady, and at the same time to live, to care for her, provide for her, and to give her a home through a total donation, a consecration, through a new Totus Tuus would be St. John, the beloved disciple. And we read in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 19, that when Jesus tells John, "Behold your mother," that from that moment the beloved disciple took her into his home, meaning that St. John did the same that St. Joseph had done. With the same obedience of faith, St. John takes the Blessed Virgin Mary into his home and brings her into the fullness of his interiority, not only his home but also his heart. And from that moment, he would live with her, he would listen to her, he would allow her to guide her, and he would receive the complete radiation of her immaculate presence. He would be formed by her in order to be able to reach the stature of Christ, and at the same time, he would be her faithful son who would care for her, would protect her, and would be sure to protect all of her mysteries, would listen to them, and at the same time provide for her. St. John, another manly heart who gave his Totus Tuus, opened his home to her, for her, and at her service, in obedience to Christ, receives all the effects of total Marian consecration. The Totus Tuus of St. Joseph and the Totus Tuus of St. John, like the Totus Tuus of St. John Paul II, a Petrine heart, is an immense gift to the Church, the family of Jesus, and for each one of us, disciples of Christ who are called to live consecrated to the hearts of Jesus and Mary, just as St. Joseph would do. the first Totus Tuus of history, was proclaimed by Saint Joseph in all of his life.